What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And of course, today is no exception. Today, we promise to also bring you fun, excitement, and a lot of zaniness because we've got the two Amy's, AIMYEES, accounts for both of them, and Loni Coonbs, who you have seen before, and Stephen Peterson, who we are going to introduce momentarily. It's been a long day already. It is week 6 of the double murder trial of embattled former attorney Alex Murdaugh. Of course, he is accused of killing his wife, Maggie, and son Paul, back in June of 2021. And that, my friends, is just a fraction of the story. Best guest, I'm going to introduce you to Loni Coonbs. She worked as a criminal trial attorney, prosecuting over 50 cases, ranging from murders and gang cases to sex crimes and DUIs. Now she does a lot of legal commentary on television, including CNN, Investigation Discovery, Oxygen, The Today Show, The View, Access Hollywood, Dr. Phil, and she is the author of the book with the longest title in the world, You're Perfect, and Other Lies Parents Tell, The Ugly Truth About Spoiling Your Kids. She had to get it all in there, and I appreciate that. Stephen Peterson is the only man other than myself that you're looking at on the screen. Listen to this bio if you don't think we get the best guests in all of true crime. He was a senior special agent of the United States Department of Justice, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, for nearly 3 decades, and at the time of his retirement was the most senior DEA street agent in the world, the most senior in the world. He also worked the investigation into a clandestine meth laboratory that was the inspiration behind the television series Breaking Bad. He is now a Charleston, South Carolina-based private investigator working for Stephen Smith's family. When I put it out earlier, I had said Mallory Beach. It is, in fact, Stephen Smith's family, and he was just featured in the Netflix series about the Murdaugh murders. I'm not sure what he can talk about. We're about to find out. But if you have questions related to Stephen Smith and that mysterious death, send them Stephen's way. Amy Lawrence Lovely. She fights for the civil rights of the wrongfully accused every single day for the Lovely law firm in South Carolina. And I always have to mention she was on MTV's Teen Mom 2 and has appeared on the Dr. Phil show. And last but not least, she is going to show. She promised us, but tennis is more important. So as soon as she wraps up, she will be here. Amy Zimmercheck. She's just an all-around badass defense attorney out of the state of South Carolina. And she is a member of the Super Lawyers, had 10 not guilties on felony cases, including murder and rape, since 2009. So an impressive resume, to say the very least. George Washington with the first comment of the night, and then we're going to get into today's testimony and everything else. George Washington, the first president of the United States of America, who's long been dead, is commenting. This whole case should have been thrown out after we found out SLED lied to the grand jury on guns and on blood transfer to get Alec indicted. Loni Coonbs, you're an attorney. What do you say to George?
George, I didn't like hearing that either. You really, and honestly, it's shocking to me. It's shocking to me that there would be anything like that. I'm not sure if he was saying that he did it intentionally. I don't think he did. I think he said that he did not have access to the first report. There was something about how it got lost in his email or something. But to me, that's very troubling. And as the investigating officer in a case, one, you should know every report that's come through. And I think it had been months before that first report came through. And second of all, once you find that out, you need to, put that out there that that it's different now and reassess the case because the grand jury relied on that. And I think that was a very significant piece of evidence. So I'm hoping that they had a discussion, the prosecution team had a discussion about that before they decided to actually, proceed with the case. But I understand it doesn't smell right. It doesn't feel right. And that is the investigating officer. That's the person really, it's their responsibility, this whole case. And I think that it taints the investigation if you feel like you have a question about the credibility of that investigating officer.
Bonnie Whitney, and I'm going to intersperse a ton of STS Nation's comments today, writes, all Murdaughs are lying. Plus, I'd really like you to listen to John Marvin. You can catch their lies. Right off the bat, Amy, Lawrence, lovely. What stood out to you today about the testimony from John Marvin? And we'll get into the others as well.
So with John Marvin, it felt very sincere, right? And I know that a lot of people in the chat comments were talking about how it felt very rehearsed or very like he knew what the questions were going to ask. And the first thing I thought was every witness that takes the stand should have been prepped and knew what questions were going to be asked of them. That's what happens in a trial. It's not, trial by ambush with witnesses. They've given statements before. When I say prepped, that they know what question's coming, right? And what question's coming after that, what leads into that, and why it's an important part of the story. That doesn't mean that it's not truthful. Believe me, if it weren't truthful, they would have been pointing it out. But a good prepared witness is the best thing you can have in a trial, because getting up there, if we're up there and it feels like, and this is a very colloquial South Carolina thing to say, but if it feels like you're pulling teeth because it's taken forever and you can't quite get anything out of them, believe me, we would all be ready to pull our hair out. You want prepared witnesses. And I thought John Marvin was very sincere and very kind, right? I mean, I thought that he was probably the most important witness that we saw from the defense out of everybody. We didn't get that emotion from Buster that we wanted, right? We didn't get that sincerity or that sadness or whatever that feels like in real life. It didn't feel good to watch Buster testify. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, Loni. But like John Marvin, he sincerely really loved Paul and had this wonderful warm, and really loves his brother and his other siblings. And I think that come out, I thought he was a great witness for the defense.
Amy and I texted about this during the day. She said,
I heard you guys are the best of text buddies. You even FaceTime. I'm always left out of all the fun. That's okay.
Every day about the case. And she said, that John Marvin was really getting to her. And I said, for the first time in this trial, teared up a little bit when he was talking about Paul. Now, I think some of the other stuff a little bit later in his testimony, I'm not sure exactly about the credibility of it, but when he was talking about Paul, I felt that was real emotion. And when it was contrasted to when Buster and Alec took the stand, it made me think that was so much more forced than the way John Marvin really seemed to love and care about Paul. There was like no artifice. He wasn't worried about how people are perceiving this, or am I trying to cover anything up? It was just, I love this kid and I miss this kid. And so I did. I was struck by his sincerity about his emotions for Paul. And it was in stark contrast to Alec, especially.
Steve, just promise me that you and I can text and FaceTime like the women do when we're done here. I'm going to try to get, like I said, through as many comments. I'm coming to you right in a moment, Steve. But Maggie Seymour writes, I really appreciate the objectivity your videos have. Please continue having guests who are not one-sided, innocent until proven guilty. Followed here by Kelly Hans. John Marvin testified something about a T-shirt Alex was wearing showing blood smear where he wiped his face. And also, he said there was significant blood, and also said it was obvious that Alec had taken a shower when he got there that evening. We can break that down in a little bit. But Steve Peterson, and I know a Steve Patterson, who's a correspondent for NBC News, so I already apologize to Steve. I call him Patterson instead of Peterson, and I just confused myself. But Steve, set aside Stephen Smith, who you did some investigating for the family, just your investigator chops, and you have a lot of them. What is kind of your 360 bird's eye view of this entire story, which is hard to encapsulate, I'm sure, in just a few moments, but curious what you're thinking so far in general.
Well, my biggest struggle I have with this entire case is Alex and his lies. I mean, here you have your wife and child murdered, and the first words out of your mouth to the first cops who arrive is a lie. Where were you? And he lies. He doesn't tell anybody until he finds out well after his alibi that, oh my God, there's a video putting me on the scene, puts me at the place of the murder minutes before the murder occurred. He never divulged that, and we didn't hear about it until he actually, or proved it until he actually got up on the witness stand. I was half expecting him to get up on the witness stand and go, that wasn't my voice. Everybody else is mistaken. That wasn't me. I wasn't there. I was kind of stunned that he got up and said, yeah, I was there. Yeah, I lied to everybody. I'm a liar, but so is everybody else. So we're all liars here. It's just, who do you want to believe? Who's the biggest liar is going to win?
And I mean, Steve, you work with, all sorts of drug dealers, not with, but, trying to capture them. I mean, what does lying tell you about a person's character, and does it correlate necessarily to being a murder, a double murder?
Yeah, I believe it does. It's one thing nobody can take from you. One thing that only you can give away, and that's your integrity. You start lying, that's it. You've lost your integrity. Nothing else matters. And as I found out while during my investigation, Alex has lied previously under depositions. So this is not the first time he took the oath and lied. He did it before in the Gloria Satterfield deposition with the insurance companies. So he's tried to control the narrative. He's tried to make himself as the victim. And it's all been, number one, for the money. And number two, I guess he just, as he panics, he reacts in the moment, but doesn't think of the long-term consequences that'll happen down the road. He's a very short-sighted guy, which kind of surprises me actually, it seems based on his testimony, he's a pretty good lawyer.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
DEA guy, right?
Yeah, that's me.
Who? No, I'm just saying, like, that's your, like, drugs more than anybody. Do you know anybody taking $50,000 a week worth of drugs? Absolutely freaking not. And I'm trying not to curse tonight. I'm trying to be good. Please. That is freaking insanity. I've had clients, very rich clients, who are addicted to prescription Percocet, right? And I went back through a case and dug through an old file, and I look, and they're spending like 7 to 8. And this is someone who's had an opioid addiction for 30 years. You know what I mean? They're spending $7,000 a month, not $50,000 a week. That's bullshit, right?
Yeah. So Steve, Amy brings up a really good point here. What did you make of that? Well, when I first heard it, I said, "Oh, 50,000 a month. That's still a ton." Then I found out it was 50,000 a week. Yeah. There is a airstrip and a hangar, which everyone tells me was there before they purchased the property.
Well, the property was owned by a previous drug dealer.
There you go.
What do you
make the property, right?
Yeah. Right. What do you make of that, Steve? What do you make of that number, that 50,000? I mean, could that be personal usage? Is it even possible? No.
Think of it this way. When I sit down and talk to drug traffickers because in the federal system, everybody cooperates. Okay. Rarely do you go to trial. Mm-hmm. I've had a couple dozen trials, but most people, I've arrested over 1,000 people. 95% of them plead guilty. And part of the plea agreement is you cooperate. So in the federal system, everybody snitches.
You got to get that downward departure, right?
That's right. That's right. So what I try to do is I try to listen to their words. I try to get them to explain to me, all right, so you were selling drugs. How often? How much? How did you do it? Blah, blah. And I let them kind of set the baseline. Well, Alex got up not selling drugs. He's taking drugs, $50,000 a week. Now, most people, when they embellish on the low end. They don't embellish on the high end, right? So if he's saying 50,000 a week, if I believed him, I would go, well, maybe it's more like 100,000 a week, but that's physically impossible. So I did the math this morning. If you just think of what he's saying, if half of it is true, if it's 25,000 a week, then that comes out to $1.3 million a year. And if he was an opiate addict for 20 years, well, he didn't steal enough money to supply that habit. All right. So in order for him to get the number of pills that he claims he used, he would not be able to use actual prescription drugs. There's just not enough actual. Yeah, you can't divert enough drugs in this part of the state to feed a $50,000 a week habit. So these pills have to be counterfeit pills, which most pills are today anyways on the black market. And if the black market is supplying all these pills, which he claims he's using, today's black market, watch the news. The biggest problem we have today is fentanyl poisoning. Mm-hmm. So these pills would be laced.
The odds alone would make him dead.
He would easily be dead by now.
Mm-hmm.
easily. And he seemed to be pretty alive on the stand.
Do you know why I think he will not admit that he was selling drugs? Because if he does, because not even on a federal level, but on a state level, if he goes and does that, because we know that's one of the reasons I'm worried about Eddie, right? Eddie Smith, Curtis Eddie Smith, is because they charged him with trafficking judge because he says, he gave me this money and I would go and pick it up and bring it back for him. Because it carries a mandatory 25 years in prison, right? Self-preservation at all costs. Even up until this moment, he still is thinking about himself.
Of course he is. That's all he thinks about.
That's all he thinks about.
So we are right out of the gates here. We are right into the meat and potatoes, already a little off course, but this is super fascinating. So Steve, I'm going to pose this question directly to you. What is going on then with this $50,000 a week habit? Do you believe that he was in the drug trade, that he was spying and selling drugs, or are he just lying about the number?
Yeah, I think he's lying about the number. I think maybe years ago, he was involved with the previous owner of the Moselle property, who was a drug trafficker. And that guy was arrested and was about to stand trial for drug trafficking. And it was marijuana, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And then literally days before that trial occurred, the key witness in that case, the key informant in that case, was mysteriously killed by a hit and run driver in the Florida Keys. They never caught the guy. They never found the guy who drove the car, but the key witness dies. That guy's case goes away. Alex Murdaugh represented that guy.
Well, you know what my grandpa always said, where there's a Murdaugh, there's a murder.
Right. He turned over the property as payment for the legal services, which is not uncommon. That's not an uncommon thing that you would barter. Instead of using cash or whatever, you would barter, right? I'll provide you with legal services. In exchange, you give me this property, you give me your old Ferrari, whatever it is. So while a lot of people go, oh my God, I can't believe that. Well, that's not as uncommon as you think. That's somewhat common, in fact. So I don't believe that he's involved in the drug trade. I don't. I think it's all smoke and mirrors so he can go back to I'm a victim, pity me, I've had a tough life, everything's not all roses, it caused me to act illogically, it caused me to not really to think about what I was doing, and then whenever you start posing hard, tough questions, he doesn't remember because he was using drugs and his memory's foggy. It's all too convenient for me.
And since we're talking about this, there has been a lot of talk online and on the Twitter sphere that, maybe this was a cartel hit. And Steve, I know you know about that. Let me ask you just a straightforward question. If this was in fact a cartel hit, would they have used family weapons and would they have spared Alex Murdaugh?
No, they would have killed his wife and son in front of him, and then they would have killed him. And if it was a cartel hit, if it was done to intimidate Alex Murdaugh, why did it take 45 minutes for him to call his only surviving son to tell him that his brother and his mother were dead and that maybe he should hide, as opposed to quickly come to the farm, come down to Moselle as quick as you can get here? There's been a murder. Makes no sense at all.
The great Amy has arrived. Oh, she'll call us back, she said. She came and went that quickly. Let's get through some more comments here. Mo Freedom writes, those Murdaugh men sure can turn on the tears. Watch Good Morning America if you can stomach it last June and watch them blame the boat wreck and cry on cue, followed by another comment from her, which to me, this is, this is it right here. Now that we know he was at the kennels, he cannot explain the timeline. 3 people were there, 2 were murdered. Alec did it. I mean, Loni, to you, that's the part that I just can't get past. And I really try to be somewhat objective and look at other angles, but I just can't see any other person who could have come in that short amount of time, in that narrow window, and committed this heinous crime. What do you think of this comment?
Well, I think that is sort of the prosecution's strongest part of its case in a nutshell right there. And if they did their job right, that's what the jury's going to hold on to, is just like 3 people went in 2 people were killed and 1 person walked out and lied about being there. And, I find it interesting. I think the lie is so important. And like Steve was saying, people lie, and that shows a level of integrity. He lied in the past, but the key about this lie, it's not about, hiding the money. It's not about lying and covering up. It's not about avoiding accountability for money. It is about not being there when his wife and son are killed. So you can say, well, being a liar doesn't make you a murderer. That's absolutely right. It doesn't make you a murderer. But when you're lying about not being there at the time of the murder, that places you there in why are you lying about that? And I believe, honestly, that even up until before he took the stand, he did not believe that there would be 10 or however many witnesses got up in the stand and say, that was Alec I heard on the tape. I think he thought people were still going to cover for him and say, I'm not sure if that was him or not. Because you notice nobody in the defense said anything in their opening statement about, he's going to tell you that he did this. Even John Marvin said, I didn't know. I've never heard him say it until he took the stand. I think he waited until the very last minute and decided everybody, my law partners, kids who's called me their second dad, everybody has said it was me. Okay. Now I have to get up there and give a reason why. And if you think that somebody actually just killed your wife and son, you're going to tell everything to law enforcement to try and find that killer. You're not going to hold back on the most important information you have that might help find that killer. And why would you lie about it unless you knew the time of death, right? He supposedly was gone for over an hour. Supposedly they could have been killed during any time during that time. So why would it matter if he said I was at the kennels before I left? He knew when the time of death was. That's why he knew he couldn't place himself there at that kennels and, admit the truth until, of course, the video came out.
Wow. Very compelling the way you put it there. Nancy Drew writes, good author, where did he ditch his clothes and murder weapons, and when did he have time to ditch them? Any ideas, Amy Lawrence Lovely?
Well, a friend of mine said this is where the prosecution's going to have a hard time, right? Because according to their timeline, he had 12 minutes. And this is their words, not mine. They told me this today. And he said, this is where if I were the defense attorney, this is where I'd be holding in. You've got to tell me that in 12 minutes, he killed his wife and his son, cleaned up, all evidence of gunshot residue on himself, all evidence of any kind of DNA and blood, ditches all the weapons, hides everything, and leaves in 12 minutes. It gets back to the house, does all these things. And matter of fact, his joke was, he's like, if you can do that in 12 minutes, I'll kiss your ass. And I thought to myself, that's going to be the problem. That's exactly what the defense should say. You're telling me that he kills his family and everything in 12 minutes, gets rid of all the evidence, cleans himself up, and then takes off to Moselle. That's a very hard sell. Just as hard as it is to wrap my mind around somebody else doing it, that's also going to be the hard sell. And I think that both the prosecution, the problem is with Alex's testimony is that everyone is buying it. Not everyone, but a lot of people are buying the bullshit, right? Because we've seen on these snapshot polls that are online, right? Whether it's Law and Crime or Crime and Law or Fitz News or whatever, we were looking at for the last 4 or 5 weeks, we've looked at the numbers are 85% guilty, right? But now they're 65% guilty. My friends from law school in other states, my buddy from Tennessee, who was a prosecutor, who's now a defense attorney, he said, Amy, I haven't watched any of this trial, but I watched Alex Murdaugh's testimony today, and I believe everything he said. And I started laughing hysterically. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You believe, and my mom is a living example. She said, I believed him. And he was a genius because he was making Creighton Waters look like the crazy one. He was Mr. Water, and Creighton should have just matched his kindness and respect with the same exact Southern bullshit he was putting on. And instead, he kept wanting it was all about ego for Creighton. He was wanting to have this, you can't handle the moment, you can't handle the truth moment. And it wasn't ever coming. And people are buying what he is selling. Because, matter of fact, Loni, I was watching this past weekend, one of your Dr. Phil shows, and Dr. Phil says that he is selling, he is not telling, right? He's not telling, he is selling. And that's exactly what it felt like.
Yeah.
But people are buying it. That's the problem.
I think that is an accurate statement. I've heard that too, that he's selling, not telling. And you can see it right here. Linda T writes, I still see a hung jury coming. There's so much discrepancy between just STS Nation. Deep Diver says no, hung jury, guilty. And then to this comment, and I'm going to toss it to Amy Zimmercheck, who has joined us. If she can hear us, I have to unmute her in one sec. The jury does not want to go to Moselle. They told the judge, followed by Randy Ward, who writes, road trip to Moselle is a setup for a mistrial. Amy, I just popped her off by accident. So unmute her. Amy, what do you think of this impending road trip to Moselle?
Well, so I love a good jury view. But I'll tell you what, a couple of things make me nervous in this, because there are actually very specific rules about it. And like the judge is like, oh, all the lawyers can come. No, the rules are, I love the rules, I'm a rule nerd, but the rules are that one lawyer from each side comes and nobody can say anything, right? So the press can't come. And I'll tell you, I don't know that it's going to, I don't know what the defense thinks that it's going to help them with, because I think what the jury's going to see is that those two spaces were a lot closer than they look on paper.
What, Moselle and the house and the kennel?
I mean, the feed room and where she was.
And the hanger between the two bodies.
Yeah.
The other question I have is they didn't talk about going up to the house, but I wonder if they are, and this is going to be an O.J. Simpson moment, if any of you are old enough to remember that, when they did the walkthrough and he had all the pictures, the loving pictures of the family. I'm wondering, are they pulling that stunt too? You know, the loving family pictures in the house? Because that should not be allowed. It just drives me crazy.
I think that's all gone anyway.
It is. I think it's been sold, or it's a pending sale.
Okay.
Amy, I'm going to mute you while you're not on because your audio is a little funky. Loni Coonbs is only 32, so she doesn't remember O.J. Simpson. She's just pretending she does. Happy Camper, the comment here. So much testimony and the jurors cannot take notes. Ridiculous. Miss Enigma, he needs to be guilty for putting so many people through listening to his rambles as well as murder. To this question, which is interesting, from Blue Jays. Question: rumors are swirling that a surprise witness may be called on rebuttal that may contradict AM's narrative of being a dedicated family man. Thoughts on this? Amy Lawrence Lovely, you're in the South Carolina fold. You're in the know. Have you heard anything about this that you can share with STS Nation?
I have not. And the only thing I can think of is that Fitz News interviewed a woman who says that she was essentially a prostitute that he saw, and he was violent with her.
Yes.
You know, I haven't seen anybody give this any other kind of like credence. Like everybody talks about, there's a lot of talk, but I'm not seeing anybody come forward. Amy Z, have you heard anything about this?
Well, I've got to unmute her. Go ahead, Amy. I'm sorry.
I also turned my air off, so that might help the volume, and I turned the volume down. I think the only one that I could think of is maybe that they're going to recall Marion Proctor, the sister, because Alex basically called her a liar during his testimony, and I think that's the only like person that I think would really have something different to say than she did before. Not different, but I think she didn't expound on a lot of things. And she really just kind of kept to the answers. But I don't think that he did her right in his testimony. And that's the only thing that I can think of. Let's
take about 3 steps backward here to 2015, I believe it was. Steve Peterson. That's when Stephen Smith was involved in this hit and run, as they called it, and wound up dead in the roadway. You were just featured in the Netflix series that's currently available. Can you just tell us how you came to work with Stephen Smith's family and, you know, sort of where things stand right now? I'm sure some of it is confidential, but whatever you're able to share, we would appreciate.
Well, I didn't know any of these people, nor their names, nor their reputations until the murders of Maggie and Paul. And after that occurred in 2021, was that July of 2021?
Yeah.
SLED makes this announcement that based on the murders of Paul and Maggie, they've uncovered evidence at Moselle that would prompt them to reopen the investigation into the death of Stephen Smith. Now, Stephen died 2015, July of 2015. So he's been gone for several years. At the time, he was gone for 6 years. So once they do that, once they reopen the investigation, the media just flocks down here because now you've got the Beach case and you've got the murder of mom and son, and you've got Stephen Smith. That SLED, the State Law Enforcement Division, is the one who drew the nexus between Stephen Smith and the Murdaughs. If not for them reopening this investigation, I don't think any of the viewers would realize or even ask, is there a connection between one and the other? Because they wouldn't have known about it. So the media descends upon the small little town like vultures, and they start going to the Smith family and they start asking all these questions. Well, the Smith family retained an attorney in Charleston. That attorney called me and he said, I need you to go investigate this. And I was like, I don't know who any of these people are. I don't know who the Murdaughs are. I don't know. And he goes, that's why you're going, because you don't know anybody. You're not biased. You're totally, detached, totally objective. So I go down and the first things I do is I try to get as much information as I can that the police have already generated, the various agencies, to find out what exists now, what information exists. In most cold cases, you'll find the facts that you need to solve the problem in the existing case files. They've just been overlooked and people get complacent and people get excited and they just miss stuff. Well, now that it's an active investigation, nobody will give us anything. SLED won't give us copies of anything. The local police won't give us copies. The highway patrol won't nobody will give us anything. If we had asked for this stuff 3 weeks prior, we would have got it all. But we're asking for it now. Nobody will share anything. So I go down and I meet with Stephen's mom, Sandy Smith, and I meet with her daughter, Stephen's twin, Stephanie Smith. And I sit down and I spend hours with them getting some background and talking about what do they think happened, and give me some timeline as to things that have occurred. Now, in the meantime, SLED is investigating, right? That's what they said. So my last decade with DEA, I was in charge of training state and local officers in this part of the country. And I've trained thousands of cops, dozens and dozens of SLED agents during that decade. So, of course, I reach out to as many as I can. And I say, hey, you guys know me. I trained you. Talk to me. Talk to me. So eventually they do. SLED starts cooperating. We start talking to each other. They won't tell me what this evidence is that they found. Nobody will say, to this day, nobody knows. What is this evidence that occurred? But what we do find is that Stephen had several screen names for various accounts in personnel, like Craigslist, the personal listings and so forth. And he's been having rendezvous, according to SLED, with a variety of people, some of which are married, some men who have got wives. And SLED is convinced that there lies the secret to the killer. Well, I don't have access to any of that. I don't have phone records. I don't have access. I don't have subpoena power. I don't have any of that. So I told SLED, all right, you guys go that way. I'm going to start interviewing all the people that Stephen and Buster and Paul, that group, all associated with each other. And some of them would talk to me, and some of them would have nothing to do with me. I tried to talk to Buster. I tried to talk to Alex Murdaugh. The law firm says no. Because of the murder, they're not going to let anybody talk to me. No. Can't talk to anybody.
What happened when you approached Buster?
Well, I couldn't. I had to go through the lawyers.
Okay.
I'm representing a law firm. I have to go the legit channels.
Ethical, yeah.
Yeah.
What's your gut tell you? Was this a murder?
Well, this is what I found somewhat fascinating. I'm not a native South Carolinian. I'm a Bostonian, and I spent the last 25 years in Charlotte. I retired from DEA in Charlotte. I only moved to Charleston in 2015. So I haven't been here that long. I didn't realize that coroners are basically, I don't know if they're elected or appointed, but they're basically political positions. It's not like you got Quincy, you know, the old TV show where he's the coroner and he's the pathologist. They almost have no medical training. So when Stephen's body is discovered in the middle of the road, the coroner goes out there and an assistant coroner goes out there, and none of which have had any real thorough medical training. And they immediately go, that's a gunshot. That injury is consistent with a gunshot. He's been shot. He's been murdered. So initially, they contacted SLED and the Highway Patrol to look into this. Well, SLED gets here and goes, gunshot, it's us. Murder case, it's us. Highway Patrol goes, murder, gunshot, take it, SLED. We investigate motor vehicle deaths. SLED takes it. They run with it. Pathologist goes, this is not a gunshot. This is blunt force trauma consistent with a motor vehicle accident. So SLED goes, well, we don't want it anymore.
Not it.
So, yeah. So guess what? Highway Patrol, tag, you're it. But when Highway Patrol takes it, every single interview that they conduct, 99% of which is telephonically, they are telling the people they're interviewing, this kid was murdered. This was not a car accident. And I'm thinking to myself, then why are you investigating it? Why doesn't SLED keep this? Why didn't Hampton County? Don't they have investigators? Why is the Highway Patrol investigating a murder?
I think the Highway Patrol was wondering that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, God bless. They did the best they could, but they missed so much stuff. They never asked the right follow-up questions. They never interviewed the right people. They're just not equipped for this. And now here, 5 years later, I enter the game.
You want to know what I've heard is the evidence that ties him is that the blue paint that was found, the trace of blue paint that was found on Stephen Smith's body matches the blue paint of like an old farm truck or something at the Moselle property. That's what I have heard. Well,
there are a ton of rumors. And this is all this is, are rumors.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you find the truth amongst rumors? You disprove as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I set out to do, disprove all the rumors. Now, the only thing that I found fascinating is when I was in my conversations with SLED, when I would throw up there that, and actually I have two theories now that I'm pretty much completed my investigation. I have two theories of what happened with Stephen. Theory one, Paul and or Buster and one or two other people were in a car. They were driving around. They saw Stephen's car broke down on the side of the road. Drove there he is walking. They picked him up. Then they just started to mess with him. They were just screwing around. They may not have actually physically picked him up. They may have just pulled up next to him in the car. And I think they were taunting him, yelling at him, drove by and struck him with something. Maybe a 2x4, maybe a bat, maybe some object. All right. So that was theory one. And the reason I discarded theory one is because SLED told me that both Paul and Buster, they could prove were not even in the county that night. Now, I'm assuming they could tell this from phone records. But I'm thinking, okay, we're cooperating. You're one cop talking to another cop. Why would you lie to me? I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have an agenda here. My only agenda is to tell Sandy Smith who killed her son. SLED, if we find the killer, you can take all the credit. You can make the press releases. You can do it all. I don't want any of it. I just want to tell Sandy what happened to her son.
Unless it's a very influential family. This is something we hear a lot, this comment from Higgy, and I just want to see if you can clarify it at all. Heard Buster was involved with Stephen romantically. Stephen Smith was out in the open about being gay. I'm late to the party here, so this is probably old news. Also heard Alec put Buster up to killing Maggie and Paul. That is, speculation there, but some of this stuff is out there. And then followed by this comment here from Mo Mouse. it was a murder because there was a gunshot wound. He also got run over. There was no gunshot wound, right, Stephen?
No gunshot wound.
Okay.
No. And there's enough blood at the scene, and I don't mean to get graphic, but if they had killed him somewhere else and then dumped his body in the road here, you wouldn't have nearly the amount of blood in the road. He would have drained out by the time he got to where they put him. So there's too much blood on the scene, in my opinion, to say he was murdered somewhere and then brought here.
This comment from Iris Hewlett, this goes back to the current story, the current case. I don't trust inadequate, sloppy investigations, lies to grand jury, and fabrication of evidence. Amy Z, who's kind enough to join us in her automobile. How much is this gonna, how much could this potentially hurt the state?
It could hurt them a lot. I've been beating this drum since my first trial, 16 years or 15 years ago now at this point. They are notoriously not just SLED, which is an embarrassment because they're the state law enforcement division. They're supposed to have a little more clout. But these investigators cut corners all the time. And what's sad and frustrating is that you would think that they would do better. They would do better, but it's 2021 when this happened. They're not doing better. Somebody told, I think maybe when Amy today earlier said that maybe they're going to recall David O. And I said, he's not setting foot in that courthouse.
I agree.
He's never getting on the stand again, ever. I think that can hurt them. But I'll tell you what's interesting though. It was hard for me to listen to John Marvin's testimony today just because it was so objectionable at times. But then Jim is talking to him about how they found Maggie's phone and how they were the ones who turned it on. But then he's yelling that they didn't put it in a Faraday bag. And then, John Marvin's telling he'll walk everybody anywhere. But then they're yelling that they didn't have a clean crime scene. I'm like, come on, defense. You got to pick a side and stay with it.
Jen's a Doodle here. I'm going to mute Amy again. The prosecution has got to step up to the plate, stop letting the witnesses ramble. I know this is ancient history, the cross of Alex Murdaugh, since it happened on Friday. But Loni, just curious about your take. There was a mixed bag. Some people thought Creighton Waters did a great job. Others thought that, he did a really poor job. We had Tim Jansen on Saturday as a criminal defense attorney, and he was just firing off questions where I was thinking to myself, if he was Creighton Waters, Alex Murdaugh was, dead man walking, he would have been found guilty. What did you think of the job?
As a prosecutor, I was screaming at the screen, obviously, for many reasons, but one of which Amy alluded to before, and that is it's a strategy game. You play off what the person is giving you. Alec was so careful, so controlled, so contrite, so emotional. And Creighton was taking this really aggressive approach and being snide and snarky. It was not playing, and it made Creighton look like he was the one out of control instead of Alec. But I will say this for Creighton. When you go back through it and you actually pull out what he got out of the testimony, I actually think he did a good job in really getting Alec to focus on specific minutes of the timeline, right? So the timeline from, okay, you were on the video from 8:44 to 8:45. What did you do in the next minute? What did you do in the next minute? So he kind of covers those minutes up to the murder. He also does that for after, when he comes back from his mother's house. So I think he did well on tying up the timeline. It'll give him stuff to argue in the closing argument. But as we know, jurors react emotionally and with their guts as it's going along. And the last thing you want the prosecutor to do is, through their demeanor, make the defendant look sympathetic, and make it look like they're going to start feeling sorry for him when he's the last person he should be, feeling sorry for. So I think Creighton got played on that. I think he should have been able to pull back. I think some ego was involved. Like Amy said, we talked about that. Actually, we texted about that. So that part really disappointed me. I think he had thought it through and he made some good points. I thought it was good at the end where he pointed out, he really got Alec to say, my whole reason for lying about the kennels was because I was, paranoid and drug, addicted, and because I didn't trust SLED, which obviously has a whole bunch of issues. all these things that were there in that very first interview with SLED. And then he played the body cam footage, which was before anything. And immediately the first thing he says is, I'm getting that alibi out there. I wasn't here. So I thought that was good. There were good moments along there, but it took way too long. He should have gotten in and gotten out and been in much more control.
A quick reminder, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, on Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. The best thing you can do for us, STS Nation, is just hit that like button. And if you have not subscribed, you see that we have the very best guests in true crime. So please subscribe and you will get to hear from all these best guests all the time. Amy Lawrence, you have your hand raised. That's something the move my mother does. So
I just want to say this. And y'all, I think he did it, right? My heart of hearts, my gut says he did it. But I say this, and this is going to piss off everybody in your
wonderful,
and you're watching. But Alex Murdaugh was the best fucking lawyer in that room during his testimony, and it was very obvious why he made millions of dollars. Right?
I thought you weren't cursing tonight.
He was cool, controlled. He was the one making the prosecutor look crazy. Like, I mean, I think he did it, and I'm watching him, and Creighton's going, and what did you tell them in that room? When you sat across from that witness, from your client, to tell them, what were your words? What did you say to them? And what he's trying to say is, hey, he snowed these people right in front of him. This is what he's doing right here. And Alex Murdaugh was not taking that bait. Mr. Murdaugh, listen, I understand what you're saying. I get it, but I can't tell you what I said 12 years ago. That makes sense to me. I can't tell you what I told somebody 12 years ago, but I can tell you I lied to them and I stole from them and I did the wrong thing. And you're like, before you know it, I'm thinking, yeah, this guy, Creighton's losing his mind because he asked that question 100 times. And I think the asshole did it. That should tell you everything you need to know. This is not a good cross-examination when I'm literally thinking maybe I'm starting to feel sorry for him. And Creighton's the crazy one.
Amy Z, do you agree with that assessment, being that you were a veteran criminal defense trial attorney?
I do. Amy will tell you, like, people will have me come in and cross-examine their clients ahead of time.
Not particularly, yes.
Everybody. Because, well, and I'm terrible at direct, and I'm the first to say that. I can't stand it, but I can cross all day long because I think that the biggest problem with this case, and I think both sides realize it now, Jake's son, when he was demanding his speedy trial, and then the state going, okay, well, we'll give you your speedy trial, but they weren't ready. And so much of a good trial strategy and a good successful trial is to be able to keep it concise and to keep your points, make your points, and just like Loni said, get in and get out. And we all saw what Creighton was doing. He was saying to the jurors, just like he did to all of those people he loved and cared for, he sat right in front of them and lied to them and stole from them, and it hurts his heart and blah blah blah. But that's what he's doing to you, jurors. But one time would have been enough. But Creighton he lost the moment because he just kept beating it into the ground. And there were times though that Alec would just talk and talk and talk, and he started to slip up and hang himself a little bit. But then Creighton did. I mean, and this has been a problem I've said with the state this whole trial, is that they do not listen to the answers that are coming from the stand. They have their own narrative going on in here instead of just. I mean, there are a couple of times that Alec gave him. I mean, I didn't intentionally kill them. Jump on that, But nope, they don't listen to that.
We're really texting each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's media 101 too. You want to be a good interviewer. Some people didn't like Larry King, but he just sat there and listened and asked 3-word questions, and that's what made him kind of legendary in what he did. A comment here from Ann Vroom. Careful of reading too much into social media, chats, polls, tweets. Murdaugh's defense team is likely doing a lot of spin under various social media aliases. Amy, is that true? Do you go in and do that? I find that to be a bit of a stretch. But
I mean, I haven't seen it. I mean, today was the first time we saw good defense, like expert witness. Like, I don't think that. They can't even get their expert witnesses to make sense, right? And are any good and like are charismatic. Like, I don't think that they're thinking that far ahead. they're still rolling into this with like I said, if they had a jury consultant, my mind is blown because nobody was listening to them, obviously.
Dolph Lilly writes, important to remember Netflix's entertainment, all caps, that is true, Making a Murderer left several incriminating facts out of the documentary entirely. Critical to separate fact from fiction. STS Nation always keeping us honest. Steve Peterson, I love guys like you because you're also, like journalists, you are observers of human behavior. So I'm curious, when you were watching Alex Murdaugh on the stand, and he's got a lot of bodily secretions, let's put it that way, coming out of his nasal area and mouth and other areas. What did you make of that? Did that reek of deception? I had Detective Phil Waters and former FBI agent Scott Duffy, who was he was FBI out of Delaware for 20 plus years. And Phil Waters investigated over 400 homicides and had a show called The Interrogator based on his interrogation skills, which are unmatched, and said it just smelled of horrible deception. But I'm curious your thoughts as a one-time most senior agent in all of the DEA.
You make it sound like that's an impressive thing. It just means I was the oldest guy out there still buying dope on the street, which probably means I was the stupidest guy out there just still doing that. But by watching his, it was very dramatic, and it was, in my opinion, and my wife, who was sitting next to me, we were both commenting, saying, "This is so staged." 1 minute he's blowing snot everywhere, and it's the waterworks are on, and then they'll ask a question about the money or the finance, and that it dries up, and then he starts communicating again, and then they'll show a picture or talk about his wife or his son, and then the waterworks come on. I mean, you can't turn on emotion on and off like that. Well, you can if you're a psychopath, but you can't. A normal person can't. So this drama, I pray that the jury sees it for what it is. That it's nothing but playing to the jury.
Two of them were crying with him, and a third slid Kleenexes over to the bailiff to hand to him. So I think some of them are buying it.
See, and that's what worries me. That's what leads me to
my mother is one of them. Okay,
that's what leads me to think we're going to get.
My dad swears he's got Vicks Vapor Rub in that Kleenex, right?
Right.
Because he's the only guy I know who can snot that much and only use one of his own tissues over and over again, and it still be not all snotty, right?
Ethan Davis writes, to explain the stashing of the clothes, Amy Z, I'm going to throw this to you. To explain the stashing of the clothes and weapons, could the timeline be off? Could the murders have happened earlier than when the phones were turned off, disabled? There was one other comment I wanted to get to, and it was here from Jen. Stop with the rumors, focus on the timeline. So, Amy, we were saying this, I think, before you came on, that the timeline is really key, in my opinion, which is meaningless. I just don't think there's anyone else who could have committed this crime in the window where we believe the crime happened. But what do we know about this timeline, and how firm is it really?
No, well, the timeline is the timeline is firm. What we I think need to remember is that he didn't have to get rid of all of that in 12 minutes. He didn't have to. I mean, we've all seen the picture of the inside of his vehicle where there's a towel that nobody bothered to collect. So it was a matter, and don't get me wrong, I think that he planned this for quite some time. And so he just needed enough time to, you don't have to hide it all and ditch it all. But just to maybe to move it to mom's, to, they keep talking about how he parked along that back, but that's where they always parked, in the back, but still nobody looked there. And he counted on that because he could have just left that and gone back. It's not something that he needed to dispose of in 12 minutes. And I tell you, I'm a firm believer in this. And I love my client, because I'm telling you, I think had there not been as much traffic on the side of Old Takahashi Road that day, that my client would be the dead one, and there would have been a gun planted in his car, and he would have taken the fall for all of this, because I think that was Alex's next grand plan.
And of course, Amy is cousin Curtis Eddie Smith's attorney. That who she is referring to there. Amy Z, right back to you. John Marvin was on the stand, and again, I think we talked about this before you popped on, so I want to get your take. I mean, he did seem really credible, and one of the questions from Dick Harpootlian basically was, you know, how was Alec acting the day of and or the night before? Is when I think he last talked to him. He said he seemed totally fine, and you're saying that this may have been planned out. What did you make of John Marvin on the stand? Was he a credible witness? Did he hurt the state's case?
So, and it was actually Jim that asked the question. But
Okay.
but here's my retort to that. John Marvin knows his brother so well that he knows when he has changes in his voice or when he's excited or low, but he didn't know he was an opioid addict for 20 years.
Damn.
He wasn't. It's because he wasn't, Amy.
That's because he wasn't. But that to my point. I mean, like Amy called me, and I've been very busy today. But like a lot of my irritation was just, you know, that the savior John Marvin Murdaugh was up there just, you know, predicting all of his emotions and what people were thinking and feeling and doing. And I was like, somebody object. It was making me insane. But, you know, I just find it ultra convenient that, you know, that one of Alex Murdaugh's tombstone buddies, who I'm sure the Stephen Smith family is familiar with, you know, Mr. Alexander, you know, happens to pick John Marvin up. You know, you're looking for an extra shooter or another shooter. You got my 2 votes right there.
By the way, I found out Amy Z works like 21 hours a day. The only other person I know who does that is Elon Musk. They must have similar bank accounts. Is all I can deduct.
I wish.
Steve, back to you here from Cruz, Boston. Your old or original home, I should say. The gas cap, we're going back here to Stephen Smith for a moment. The gas cap hanging down was ridiculously a setup of a fake scenario. Stephen's wallet was in the car. He had no gas can and was walking the opposite direction to the gas station. Killer likely drained the tank. Since you are our guest of honor tonight, what's your retort to this comment?
Well, I find it strange that you would leave the gas cap hanging down. I agree with that. And he did have a wallet in the car, but he had more than one. He had a wallet. He had the information on him as well. He didn't have a gas can because, I mean, let's be honest. How many of us carry a gas can with us in a car? You know? And he was walking in the opposite route of the gas station. I've been down that road many times. There's nothing anywhere near there, but this was in the direction of his father's home. So he was walking in the right direction. So I'm still kind of going with, well, the different theories that are out there. I don't think this killer set up anything in advance. I don't think this was an advanced plot to kill Stephen Smith. I really don't.
Back to the current case, Peony Lover writes, murders could not have happened before 8:44 p.m. And it's kind of interesting because we go to this comment from Paul Dion. The murder could not have happened before 8:49 p.m. Loni, what is going to happen in the deliberations room? I know the door is closed and you're not going to be inside there, but how hotly debated do you think this timeline is going to be once that door shuts?
I think it's going to be key. I mean, I think that's a really critical point of the case. And it's interesting because both the prosecution and the defense pretty much agree on the timeline. It's just that they're interpreting it differently. And so I'm hoping that, you know, both sides, but really the prosecution uses demonstratives during the closing that lays it out very clearly for the jury so they can see it. I agree with both of those people. It couldn't happen before 8:44 because that's when the video was going. And it couldn't have happened before 8:49 because both Maggie and Paul were still on their phones during that time. So that's why the prosecution's theory is that it happened after 8:49. But it's, you know, trying to keep all of those numbers in your head clearly, unless you have it, you know, all written out. Like, I mean, I downloaded, you know, that long timeline because I can't remember it all. And I've been taking notes the entire, you know, trial. So I'm going back and highlighting parts just to keep all of the times clear. And I hope that the jury has some idea, something like that to be able to look to, because nobody can remember all of those numbers. There's just way too many in this case.
And Amy, I'm going to ask you about that in just one moment. Nancy Chadwick writes, listen, this was investigated properly from the get-go. There is a side of this where people do feel like they did, a proper investigation. But the fact, Amy, Lawrence, Lovely, that they cannot physically take notes, there's just a monumental amount of information. I think there's over 500 exhibits that have been shown. What does it really come down to in that deliberations room when this is all over? Because they're not going to be remembering minutia. They're going to be remembering the tears that your mother noticed and things of that nature. But what will the jury do without notes?
Well, they're going to have all these exhibits and everything that's in evidence, right? So they're going to have that timeline provided by the state. They're going to have all these different things. The problem is with that timeline is that it's that much, right?
It's so much.
Bonnie, hold it up. I mean, they're going to have to make heads or tails out of that mess right there.
It's like 43 pages, and that's the short one. That's the
condensed one. So, I mean, what both the state and the prosecution really need to do is they need to go in and they need to make some demonstratives, right, for their closing argument. And if they get up there, and I heard them talking about 2 to 4 hours for a closing, I'm like, sweet Jesus, please, no. And they need to go up there and they need to have a cohesive theme and story, right? Because we haven't seen that yet. They need to put up their timelines. Dick Harpoli needs to go in there and say, you tell me if you can do all that shit in 12 minutes and I'll kiss your ass, right? That's a not guilty. And then Creighton needs to get up there and he needs to say, there ain't nobody else who could have done it and, and been there in that moment, and then put up his timeline, a condensed timeline, the only person who could have done it in that moment. And chances are we're not going to see any of those from anybody. I just have a feeling. And that's the part that's going to get lost in translation, and it's going to hem up the jury. And they're going to be back there combing through 43 pages trying to make sense of it, and they're all going to get frustrated, and it's going to be a hung jury. And they're going to go with their feeling, right? And there's going to be 2 or 3 on that jury that still come back to, I don't think somebody would kill their kid like that, right? And because that's the one thing that hems everybody up, anybody I talk to about this case, either they're straight up, burn him to the ground, he's a horrible human being, or, the thing that holds me back is I just don't see him killing his child like that. And you're going to have those 2 or 3, maybe more, and it'll end up being a hung jury. That's what I see happening.
Cruz Boston writes, Alec will be Drew Peterson. He is a former police officer out of Illinois that ultimately got convicted for killing one of his many wives.
No relation.
No relation. Just wait for it. If this trial hangs or acquits, he'll go down for Gloria Satterfield's death. That's karma. Over to here, this comment from Peggy Breidenbach. He could have had time to hide clothes and weapons and move them later. Amy Z, you're shaking your head in agreement. What about that? The missing clothes and the weapons.
Well, so to the listener who said that they thought SLED did a great job, and that's another one of the frustrating things is that I've seen a lot of the evidence that hasn't been put forth in front of the jury. And so I know that there are things that they haven't seen that were in the house that had blood on them that nobody collected and that nobody saw. I know that John Marvin took a boat trip to the Bahamas that next weekend by boat, not by plane, by boat. There are so many things that the jury, for whatever reason, is not going to hear. Or will. One of the reasons is we might be here for 10 more years, but it's to me it wasn't a spontaneous thing. I thought that it was really. I didn't think that it helped the defense when one of their experts, and I just caught it briefly today, but he said something like Paul. He kind of was surprised, but not like caught off, like not defensive surprise, not like, whoa, who are you? Just like surprised that it was happening. And because I do think that this was a not well thought out, but a well enough thought out plan to be able to have done it. And I do think that the resources that are afforded to these people, I mean, we're talking 1,700 acres of land, and there's a good amount of time before any police officer or first responder got there, and we know what they sectioned off, and they missed things that they sectioned off, much less all the other areas around the kennels that they don't know about.
I've always thought he could have stashed everything in one of those feeders, right? Because for those people who don't hunt, I grew up in a hunting family. I'm from the South. This is what we do. And a feeder is like a big old, like a barrel thing where, you know what I mean? It's like you could easily just shove everything down in, put the corn on top, and you'd be done. And then go back and get it later. Nobody would be the wiser. I mean, that's a lot of acreage. You could have put it anywhere. And Lord knows if SLED wasn't even taking stuff into evidence in front of their face, they sure as heck wasn't out doing what they were supposed to do. Look, there's nothing we want more than for SLED to do their job, right? Like, I think Maggie and Paul deserve that. Gloria deserves that. Stephen Smith deserves that. All victims of crime deserve that. To figure out what happened to them and who did it and bring them to some kind of justice. That's what we're all looking for. Whether you're a defense attorney or prosecutor, I think we can all agree on those things. And when we see SLED, who are supposed to be the best of the best of us, do such a shitty job, it's really hard to stomach, because if they're going to do this in the Murdaugh case, it's not just the Murdaugh case. We've had a case together, Amy Z and I, where they were doing the same stuff. And we've talked about it on this, they're still doing it. And I always tell people that of which we do not acknowledge, we cannot change. And until they go in and somebody's head has to roll and there has to be consequences for these things, then it'll keep happening. And every defendant deserves for them to do the right thing. It's like, I don't think it should be, I mean, this is going to nobody's going to like what I'm about to say, but we're holding Alec account. They knew about that blue shirt very, very soon after the murder, right? That Snapchat video. And they never asked him. And so he has somebody go in and pack up his house and all these people running in and out trying to help him. And now we're going to hold him accountable for them not finding a shirt after his house had been packed up for months before they bring it up to him. And people have been donating clothes because we're listening to Blanca and everybody else on the jailhouse calls. And so now we're going to make it he's done something wrong because SLED didn't do their job. That's not fair either. Everybody in this whole situation, whether it's defendant to the victims, deserve better than what SLED gave them.
By the way, don't do it for me. Do it for this lady. Hit that like button right now. She would love it. Louise Rouleau, who is our friend up in the Great White North of Canada, writes, really like Steve. So many good people. And it is important to remember we are hyper-focused on a horrible crime here, but there are very good people out there. Now, this next comment, Loni Coonbs, I'm not sure if this is sarcasm or sincerity. Either way, it will apply to my question to you. Terry Crocker, Alec is a good, honest man. He would never ever hurt anyone, especially Mags and Paw. Number one, do you think that is sarcasm? Number two, you have covered so many high-profile cases as a legal commentator. Do you recall a case, I mean, OJ, I guess, was similar, but this far along where there was such a conflict of feelings in the court of public opinion?
Well, first to this text, I think it is tongue-in-cheek.
Yes.
I think that the Mags and the Papa, I did love the fact that Creighton called him out on the Papa thing. Like, if you ever in any other interview called him that, it drove me crazy that he called him Papa. I think that this is part just because there's so much social media and Twitter and so many people weighing in.
Right here, Joyce Smith, why is it so many people are willing to pick up a torch and pitchfork? I don't think that's sarcasm. So there are people on both sides of the thought process here, really kind of battling internally and externally with those who think otherwise.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. Now, the only case that I would say was as big as this one in recent time with sort of the same level of social media and Twitter attention and is the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp case. And in that case, it was fascinating how really the majority of people were staunchly in Johnny Depp's camp. I mean, I was shocked that it wasn't more evenly spaced. It was really swung to one side. This one, I think, it's a hard prosecution case. And there's a lot going on in this case. It's not just the evidence, because there's, this is circumstantial evidence, but there's a lot of drama, with rumors about the family, and then the attorneys, and, the dynamics going on in the courtroom, and sort of, playing to the jury. And so I think there's a lot for people to like or dislike that influences their feeling about the case. That's what concerns me about the jury. The jury is going to get caught up in, oh, I thought Alec was wonderful. Oh, I hate that attorney. And it's going to taint how they look at the evidence, perhaps. If the attorneys don't work really hard just to say, focus on the evidence, forget everything else out there. That's hard to do in a case like this.
Rosemary Hill writes, 2 jurors crying with Alex Murdaugh during his testimony, not guilty verdict, disgusting. However, we had Gigi McKelvey on, who's a inside the courtroom every day for this entire trial for law and crime. And she dismisses this, saying that is not true. Obviously, we are not in there. To you, Steve, if you want to add to that, but I was also going to ask you this comment from Gino 101. I wonder what Alex's motive was if he did do it. Did he just snap that night? Your thoughts?
Well, as for the first comment about whether or not the jurors are feeling empathy towards Alex, I've heard the same contradictory stories. Somebody's in the courtroom and says, oh, the jurors are crying and feeling empathetic. Then someone else says, I'm in the courtroom and I don't see that at all. They're very stoic and they're staring at him. And one person can't even look at him. It looks like he hates him. We're not there. So, who do you believe in that respect? I don't know. But I'm concerned about the hung jury. As for his motive, in my opinion, my never to be humble opinion, it's all about the money. It's all about the money. So Paul Murdaugh is a massive liability for Alex. Massive. It cost him everything with Mallory Beach. I believe he had a involvement in Gloria Satterfield. I believe he may have had some involvement with Stephen Smith, although I can't prove that because on one hand, while it's a theory of mine, SLED is dismissing it based on what they know. But this is a kid who, even in light of the boat crash, continued to behave the exact same way, continued to drink excessively in front of family and friends, consistently behaved the same way. Nothing was going to change. How many more people are going to be killed accidentally? So I think Alex had just had enough. One thing I totally believe Alex Murdaugh when he testified, when he said, I truly believe that Stephen and Maggie are dead because of the boat crash. I believe that.
I think he really believes that, right?
Well, I believe it too, because he killed Paul
Yes.
and Maggie because of the boat crash, because that was, in his view, the start of the downfall. The house of cards started falling in at that point. And I think that he just couldn't get over that. And then he just kind of snapped. He's a very calculating guy, but I think there are times where he doesn't think far enough ahead.
And we just heard that Boston accent. I went to school in Waltham, Mass, and I just heard House
there's a
of
good
Cards.
prison there.
You know what, though? The missed opportunity for Alex would have been for Jim to ask him, or wasn't it Jim that did direct on him? Yeah. Do you feel responsible? And him to say, yeah, right? I've shit a lot of people in my lifetime, and I bought a lot of drugs, and my family paid the price for that. And I don't know who did it, but instead he stuck to that boat case, which sounded like total bullshit. Total.
And if you even listen to Maggie's sister on the stand, she said what really turned it for me was even after Paul and Maggie are killed, he's still more concerned about clearing Paul's name than he is about finding the killers.
Yeah.
I guess if he gets acquitted, him and OJ will be on a massive manhunt across the country for both Paul and Maggie's killers, as well as, Nicole and Ron.
Because, the first thing, my husband's a lawyer, right? He's my law partner. Amy knows him very well. And the first thing he said was, if something happened to you and one of our boys, because I have 2 little boys, he goes, I mean, I'm rich, right? And I mean that in a, I've got expendable income. And he said, and if somebody of wealth, the first thing I'd do, if I didn't think the cops were doing, at first I'd have somebody protecting my other kid at all costs into my family.
Mhm.
And I'd hire my own team, right? I'd be calling Steve.
I'm not sure that's a wise
investigating,
move.
trying to figure out who did this to my family and bring them to justice, whether it's my justice or the police justice, whatever. So when we hear Buster saying, I wasn't afraid, I think Buster knows exactly who killed his brother and mother. And when he says, I'm not carrying a gun, I didn't want any security. Nobody else was, you know what I mean? Nobody was worried and trying to find the killer. It's because they already knew who did it.
This comment here, by the way, Loni, we heard from Terry Crocker, the one that we thought was tongue in cheek, and she commented to someone else in the chat saying, of course I'm joking. He's a murdering monster. So your instincts were correct. Pale Fox writes, and Amy Z, I'm going to unmute you to get your response to this. South Carolina, and there's a few comments very similar to this. The South Carolina justice system is corrupt. You'll see how they even helped Alec. Keep it real. Any one of us would have been in cuffs real fast. Is there, in your opinion, and I think it's a fair question, is there a problem with corruption? I know that there is in Colleton County, but do you believe there is more widespread corruption with SLED in the state of South Carolina? I know you kind of alluded to having dealt with something you and Amy Lawrence together, but that would be a real issue if that's a big problem.
Well, I'll tell you, it breaks my heart to hear people say that, because the answer is I hope not, because I see people like Amy and I and the real good, true believing, criminal defense attorneys that truly want the right thing done and justice done. And most of my clients can't pay for that. They can't pay their way out of it. I don't want, there's always bad apples in an orchard, and I hate for them to ruin the whole orchard. And because my brother-in-law is a police officer in one of the most conservative counties here in Lexington County, in South Carolina, and he's in Lexington County, and he's not a bad guy, and so it's hard. But I mean, I think that the ultimate answer that we could all probably see now is yes. The problem is that this case is not going to clean it up, and in fact, I think this case is going to contribute more to it, because there are so many more people that are involved in the financial aspects. I believe that there, are more people involved in a lot of the different aspects of this. I mean, the fact that the solicitor, that John Marvin was chumming up to the solicitor, Duffy Stone, while he was out there and praising the solicitor's office for the only ones trying to find Maggie's phone. I do think that it just reeks of distaste, and I don't like it, because regardless of whether he's Alex Murdaugh or not, I just don't think that they have done a good enough job to show that they really care about their jobs. Any of them, defense, prosecution, police, and I hate to see that. I think that's why I work 21 hours a day or more, because not on my watch. At least when my people go to prison or go home, it's going to be for the right reason.
Steve, I want to get your response to this here from Joanna Bell. One shooter, Alex, strapped the .300 blackout to himself and pulled it around to shoot Maggie after he shot Paul with a shotgun. Keep in mind, we had a witness on the stand today for the defense, Timothy Pombach, who's a blood spatter expert, and he said in defending his two-shooter theory, so we finally actually heard about an explicit two-shooter theory today. He noted that Paul was shot by a shotgun and Maggie was shot by a blackout rifle. He also determined the shooting of Paul came first and was from such a close range that the shooter would have been temporary. This is a theory that the defense had, this witness. It was such a close range that the shooter would have been temporarily stunned by the explosive violence. And it got really graphic, saying there was so much brain matter coming his way that it had to be two shooters because that person would have been too stunned. What say you? Could one person have pulled this off? And you're a firearms expert, which is why I go to you.
Well, I'm a firearms guy, but I'm not a gun nut. So there is a big difference between the two. Could one person have pulled it off? Yes. One person could have pulled it off. Is it easier to believe two? Well, it depends which side you're for. You know, you can make either narrative stick if you're predisposed to think one way or the other. I believe there was one shooter. I believe you can handle both weapons. I believe you can do both. You can fire a shotgun twice, drop it, and pick up another gun that's strapped to your body. Not a problem. Not a problem.
This next comment, Wilmington stuff, takes 1 minute to rinse off, drive half mile to throw Maggie's phone, and back at the house in time to pick up his phone in the timeline. And so, again, the timeline here is really critical. I'm just looking at a couple other comments here. This comment here is kind of funny from Cruz Boston again. So does anyone know if Griffin and Harp are probably the only ones who Alec never stole from? LOL. The Murdaugh family friend circle is smarter by the minute. We don't know if he didn't steal from them yet. It could turn out to be true. Loni, to you, two-part question. When does this actually end? We're hearing closing arguments on Wednesday, but now there's this field trip to Moselle. Moselle apparently has changed a lot. So they're only going to be allowed to visit the kennel area. But how important is that trip for the jurors? Let's start there.
Excuse me. I think jurors always are curious about stuff that they've seen, and they've seen photographs of it. I am like, I think it was Amy Z who said, it is fraught with chances for them to do something that they shouldn't do. Like if they have their cell phones, turn it on and see if they can get reception, make noises to see if they can hear it. I mean, so if they're going to do it, I hope that there's, very tight restrictions in place. They really should just go, be able to walk around the kennel, walk around the hangar, and be done with it. It's just for them to be able to see. And I think for both sides, they want them to see how close the two bodies were, and so they can kind of stand and maneuver and see exactly the dimensions of that crime scene. So I think it can be helpful for the jurors. It's also, potential for them to get information or exchange information or do their own little investigation that they're not supposed to do. And like you said, it's different now than it was then. They might turn on their cell phone and might get reception or not get reception. There used to be a booster in the house or whatever it is, and then base it on their experience there when they're only supposed to consider what was put into evidence on the witness stand.
Perry, UK True Crime. What's up, Perry from the UK? Waters has done a very solid job. And then we go to Cello Fan. These talking head shows, these people are much more than talking heads. You're talking to some of the brightest attorneys and private investigators in all the land here. But they say these talking head shows are stressing me out. Why am I watching this? One of the great things about America is you can go to another YouTube channel. Cheryl McCrill writes, too late. Creighton blew it. As far as I'm concerned, his sarcastic attitude did it for me. So again, there's this back and forth between those who think he was good, those who think he was weak, those who think Alec is guilty, those who think he is not guilty. Amy Lawrence Lovely, do you think we are getting to closing arguments on Wednesday? And since you practice in South Carolina, pull back the proverbial curtain. What will happen in that deliberations room once they get in there?
I do think we will get to closing. I'm hoping. I mean, Creighton, in his, I think Dick said it today, has not been so accurate with his timing estimations. I'm very hopeful that we will get to closing arguments on Wednesday, but we shall see. It just depends. He says he has one really long witness, which I still can't wrap my mind around.
Who is that going to be? Who do we? I mean, I know. I think Amy Z said it's going to be the sister-in-law. What's your take, Amy Lawrence Lovely?
Well, I think it could also be their gun guy, right? But to me, though, I thought that their gun expert and their criminologist expert and their pathologist, and I thought it was hurtful for them today. So now they're talking about. I mean, did I hear this wrong? Because I was going back, I was listening to it in the background and trying to go back and look at it. But they're saying it absolutely could have been a shot from the top, right, instead of from the bottom.
Mhm.
Contact.
Yeah.
So you mean someone who's really tall could have done it, not a 5-footer? Was that helpful to Alex 6'4" Murdaugh? I mean, that blew my mind. I'm like, and it goes back to, I keep saying they paid all this money. Like we're in a lawyer text group.
And by the way, that's a really important point because it totally counters their other expert witness completely.
I sent a picture of a pair of $3,000 Crocs, right? Designer Crocs. And I'm like, this is like when people pay a lot of money for something that is shitty, right? Something ugly, right?
What do $3,000 Crocs look like?
Right, they're like designers. Somebody made a Croc and like sells them for $3,000, and that's what these experts have felt like. Because like the guy from Connecticut, like the criminologist guy, I'm thinking, why did they not call? I literally am texting him like, why did they not call Dr. George Kirkham, who is he's so wonderful and he explains things on such a wonderful level. And he's like, and this is where SLED messed up. And why would we not take this into evidence? You don't need to be an expert to understand that this is what should have been done. And he explains it such a wonderful way to the jury and they understand it. Like, why do we not get him? Why do we get this guy to Connecticut that I know they paid a fortune for? Why do we have a guy who's saying he could have been shot from, I think the 5'2", I'm 5'1". So like, matter of fact, my friends are like, Amy, I knew it. It was you. The midget did it. Why are we not going with the 5'2"? Why are we going with somebody who is tall? Shot him from above.
Amy, you're too short to have done it. You're only 5'1". What are you talking about?
I know. I had to like pull her down a little bit or get a little
no
bit.
way you could have done it.
Bridget, saying, like, it just doesn't make sense. Like this defense doesn't make sense to me. The prosecution really doesn't make sense to me either. But like the defense doesn't make sense to me at all. I think that jury is going to get back there and they're going to, it's going to be a couple holdouts. And I don't think that it's going to go back to the moms of the group, right? I just don't think somebody would kill their family, their kid like that. I just don't think they would do it. It doesn't make sense to me. And they're going to be the holdouts. It's going to get heated. And I think that's how it'll go down. I mean, but this is what we do know about juries. They're unpredictable. You never know. I mean, I wonder, because I heard from a judge friend of mine that there is a vent in that courthouse where you can hear every word in that jury room. You can hear the whole deliberation. He was a visiting judge and he's like, you're never going to believe this. And I go, what? And he goes, yeah, the clerks were telling me about it. And I'm like, oh, to be a fly on that wall or a fly on the wall where you can hear from the vent, right? You just never know what a jury is going to do, but I just have everything in my gut tells me it will be a hung jury.
I'm going to give you guys fair warning. Tim Jansen, who's a criminal defense attorney who's covered, had a lot of high profile cases in Tallahassee, Florida, is predicting, I couldn't believe how precise he was. He said 16 hours of deliberations, guilty verdict. So I'm going to ask you guys at the end. Bridget Bauman writes, Congrats on your rising subscriber numbers, Joel. You deserve it. The show has excellent, credible panel members every time, focused and relevant content, and you keep everything chugging perfectly. Thank you so much. We just crossed 35,000 subscribers. We really just pivoted to true crime, sadly, with the Idaho 4 murders, which was just in November. It could not be done without STS Nation. So a huge thanks to you. I always say we have the best guests, which we do, but we also have the best audience, the best viewers, the best fans. So I really appreciate it. On to this next comment here from Dave. And Steve, this one's in your wheelhouse. I want to get your take from an investigator standpoint. I still say the 911 call alone proves Alex Murdaugh's the killer. He knew before he got to the scene that they were dead from being shot. Only the killer would know before observing them up close they were shot. What was your take if you did listen to the 911 call? It seemed like there were a lot of histrionics to me. And then when deputies actually arrive on scene, if you watch that video again, he's broken up. And then another deputy walks by and he literally kind of gets out of character and says, hey, how you doing? And goes back into the crime. So what was your take on that?
It is. To me, again, it seemed very staged, the 911 call. if I came home and found my wife and my child dead, I don't know that I would even be coherent during a 911 call. And he's going, oh, I've been up there, it's bad, and I've done this. And then exactly as you said, he's talking to the cop first on the scene. He's lying to him about the timeline. And here comes another guy. Oh, hey, how you doing? I mean, it's just unfathomable to me that can happen, that you don't see through this facade right away. You know, and I guess maybe I've missed it because I haven't been able to watch every minute of the trial, but there's just no physical way that your wife and child are laying dead on the ground. And he admitted, oh, I tried to flip Paul over. I got his phone and I dropped it. He should be, when those cops got that first cop arrived, he should have been covered in blood. He should have been covered in it. On his hands, on his arms, on his knees. There should have been blood everywhere from him touching and hugging and holding his wife and child. Not like, oh, I can't touch him, I have to save the crime scene. Who thinks of that? God bless, I'm a cop and I wouldn't think of that. I would think, my God, what can I do to save my wife? What can I do to save my kid?
All excellent points. The archetype reader writes, wow, I thought the prosecutor's cross was brilliant. We all have different point of views. I love this one from Karen Mooring. Amy brings the cursey words. She sure does. Even when she said she's not, she still delivers. But back to that comment about Creighton Waters, Amy Z, and we'll take a few more comments and wrap it up since somehow an hour and 31 minutes have already gone by. But Amy, some people said Creighton Waters did all this deliberately. He wanted to leave enough rope for Alex Murdaugh to hang himself, and he did get caught in lies on the stand. So was it deliberate, do you think?
I think in his mind, that's what he wanted. I really do. I think he wanted him to hang himself. I think that, and I know Creighton very well, and he and I are on, trust me, we are on complete opposite sides of this roadblock, especially after he threw my client back in jail. But Creighton is very emotional like I am. And I think that he's just so mad. I mean, that whole diatribe of, I stole from people, I lied to people, you know, the four things that he kept repeating, his mantra that he kept repeating over and over. And it was just getting under Creighton's skin. And Creighton let it get to him. I think that once he took a few steps back, and kind of held himself in check. You know, I think like Loni said, you know, he made some really good points. It's just, it was 10 hours of having to sift through to find them. And you know, I know that Creighton 110% believes in his case. And he in his heart believes he's doing the right thing. And I think that maybe as lawyers, we tend to be very hypercritical. I mean, it's so easy for us to play armchair quarterback when the cameras aren't on us and you know, and all the eyes are on us. But I do think that he does have some strong points, and I just really hope that they start listening to the blast of text that I've been doing for the last month and incorporate some of that into closing.
I just want to say that we were all joking. I was like, I wish they would have deputized, because we know that they do this as a volunteer AG. I would have even got blue lights. I would have paid for the blue lights in your car. Okay. I wish they would have let Amy Z cross-examine Alex Murdaugh. He would have been convicted in an hour. I'm not joking. I've watched Amy Z cross-examine someone for 7 hours without a note. Okay. She's the most incredible cross-examiner you've ever laid your eyes on. If she ever has a trial, you need to be there. This is how you do it, right? She does it textbook, the kind of shit that they teach you at trial lawyers. She does it textbook, like amazing. And we kept going. Everybody in we call it the shinier pennies text group that are like, dude, Amy Z should be the one that does this. It would be done. It would be over. She would have nailed him to the stand and been done with it.
D. McDonald, 1955. Paul could have been bent over checking the injured dog. Again, these are going to be the conversations that go on in that jury deliberations room, followed by Solicitor Randolph has been hanging out, even though he's dead. He's been on the show quite a bit over the last 2 days. And he says, I don't know if he's speaking for Alec or himself, I lied to people. I misled people. I stole money that didn't belong to me, and it was wrong. So good to see Solicitor Randolph. And then a real friend of the show here, J. Thomas Reset. Great show tonight, even if I disagree a lot. Lots of back and forth. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate that you like it. And then Venus Gal writes about Creighton Waters. Why didn't he push harder? He got to AM once or twice, but then didn't go there again. Of course, we don't know what is excluded. And then Amy Z, there was talk about why they didn't press him on the bloody clothing or lack thereof more. Is there a reason for that? Some people, like Tim Jansen said, he's a criminal defense attorney, and I forget the exact questions, but it was rapid fire. Where do you put the clothes? Why did you hide them? Are you a murderer? He asked all these questions back to back, and I was like, whoa, wow, oh my God, this guy's guilty, because it would have been wild to see his responses. But why not press harder?
The number one rule of lawyers, don't ask a question you don't know the answer to, and the bottom line is they don't know the answer. I found it funny that the defense, even through John Marvin today, said, did they ever ask you for his clothes, or did they ever ask you? But they're not. But they're not touching that either, because because they don't have the clothes anymore, right? And so it's one of those facts that makes everybody feel kind of icky, and so they just kind of stay away from it.
Pie-eyed Mickey here writes, in 15 minutes, he could have hosed off, golf carted back to the house, showered, grabbed the guns and clothes, then drive to his mother's, dump his stuff there, then visit his mom. All valid. Amy Lawrence Lovely is coming to us from the Palmetto State. She fights for the civil rights of the wrongfully accused every day in her practice. She was on MTV's Teen Mom 2, and she's been on the Dr. Phil show. Amy, I have to ask you, does this end in a acquittal, hung jury, conviction? And when do we find out the answer?
I think we find out on Friday. I don't think that they're going to want to go into the weekend with deliberations. I just don't see them doing that. I think they're over it probably at this point, because they've been here for so long. I don't think that they'll go into the weekend. They might. I think it will be a hung jury. I think if you believe, I don't think we're going to get a guilty. I hope so, but I don't think so. I also think that a hung jury would be the best thing for the state. And the reason why I say that is it gives them another bite at the apple. I think that Dick Harpootlian was pushing this narrative of this speedy trial because they didn't want any more evidence to be discovered, like the guns, right? And I think that as more time goes on, more people will talk. Like the first thing I thought is like, Amy and I have talked, and she has she has the foresight of being able to see a lot of this evidence, and I've seen a little bit of it, and we've talked about it. And one of the things that I've always wondered is like, we know that Maggie and Paul were cremated, right? And but we know that the ashes of Paul were at the Edisto Beach house. And so my question is, why do we have a graveside if that's the case? I mean, we have all these questions, and this is all coming up in these Murdaugh murder Facebook threads and Reddit and stuff like that, because they know of all this stuff. And so I think that as time goes on, we are going to see more evidence maybe come to light. And I hope that more evidence comes to light in the Stephen Smith case, and more evidence comes to light in the Gloria Satterfield case. This is what we're hoping. But I think that the reason Dick was pushing for this is because he doesn't want more evidence to be discovered. So I think that we will have an answer by Friday, late Friday night. And I think that it will be 100, but we shall see.
For 18 years, Loni Coonbs worked as a criminal trial attorney, prosecuting over 50 cases, ranging from murders and gang cases to sex crimes and DUIs. And even when she is traveling, she appears on our show, so we appreciate it. She's been on every TV network imaginable, from CNN to Access Hollywood to Dr. Phil, and is the author of the world's longest titled book, You're Perfect and Other Lies Parents Tell, The Ugly Truth About Spoiling Your Kids. I'm going to make my kids read this book, even though they're just learning to read. TK Sass, Loni writes, why wasn't Buster sobbing uncontrollably? This was his mother and brother, for crying out loud. I do have to say, we just don't know how victims are going to react. But I am curious if you found that peculiar, and I have to ask you, hung, acquittal, conviction, and when do we find out?
Yeah, I think a lot of people noticed the lack of emotion by Buster. It's interesting because I've listened to some of his prison phone calls with his dad as well. He seems to have a lot of conflicted feelings about everything, and he just seems to be holding everything inside. I don't know what that means. I don't know which way he's leaning on it, but I definitely thought it was interesting to watch his lack of emotion. As far as what I think that closing arguments will be Wednesday, maybe going into Thursday. I think they'll come back early the following week. I think that there will be a lot of discussion and disagreement in the jury room, and I think that they'll want to take the weekend to kind of think about it and come back and regroup refreshed. I do anticipate that it'll be a hung jury, mostly in favor of guilty, but I think there'll be at least a couple that will go not guilty. So I think it will be hung.
Amy Zimmercheck. All you have to know about her is she is the hardest working attorney in the nation, works 21 hours a day for her clients, and that's it. She's just a powerhouse, a workhorse. And this comment here from Sista Donka. I thought Cross was telling. Millions of irrelevant details recalled with clarity, and an inability, refusal to remember anything relevant with the questioning. I'm curious if you saw that, Amy Z. There's a lot of selective memory by Alex Murdaugh. In addition, not guilty, guilty, acquittal. What say you, and when do we find out?
First, I hire Amy for all my press. She's my PR. She's phenomenal. But I did notice that, and you notice that a lot with witnesses, that they don't want to answer your questions, and then they don't want to remember the details. I do think that that was very harmful to Alex. If you could get through it, the 17 hours or however long he was on there. So I've always been a hung jury fan, usually because I love them. But hung jury is a win for me. But I'll tell you what, I'm going out on a limb, and let me tell you why. Because I think that there will be a conviction. I think that the longer that they stay out, which is usually better for the defense, in this case, I don't think it's going to be, because they are going to have every piece of evidence in that room. And when they get all of the evidence and they get to look at it and they get to start saying, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense. And then they recall how he was on the stand with his whole mantra and his whole, and it's just demeanor in the courtroom. And then they just look at these hard facts that they cannot change, which is the timeline and the lie. I mean, there's just there's no good excuse for that lie. He had to admit it, but I don't think that's going to save him. I think that if they stay out long enough, I think that the one or two holdouts that there'll be, I think that they will have to see the writing on the wall. So I'm voting guilty.
Wow, interesting perspective on why too. Stephen Peterson was the most senior DEA street agent in the world when he retired. He's now a South Carolina private investigator. He was working at one point for Stephen Smith's family. He was just featured in the Netflix series about the Murdaugh murders. Stephen, this comment here, Alex Murdaugh didn't kill them, but knows who had them killed. Probably can't identify them as killers. They were hired hands by his drug supplier, who he probably lied to multiple times and owed hundreds of thousands of dollars. What is your response to that before we get to finality of the show.
Yeah, that's total baloney. Alex wasn't, Maggie and Paul weren't killed by the cartel. Alex doesn't know who it is. He would never keep his mouth shut. He would be giving them up in a heartbeat if he actually knew who did it and it wasn't him. Oh, he knows who did it, all right, but I believe it was him. And as for the jury, I think what's going to happen is jury's going to come back Friday and say they're hopelessly deadlocked. And the judge is going to give them an Allen charge and tell them to go home for the weekend and come back Monday fresh with a different perspective and look at it. And then when they come back Monday, they'll stay maybe a whole day, maybe part of Tuesday, and they'll come back. And I'm praying to God they can see through all this BS and they'll convict.
Loni, what is an Allen charge for those who do not know?
It's essentially where the jury says, we're deadlocked, and the judge says, go try again. We spent a lot of money on this. Go try again. We don't want to give up yet. And the jury's supposed to go back. They're supposed to do it very carefully where it doesn't look like they're putting pressure on anybody, but it's essentially to give the jury another chance to go, work together and try and resolve it.
Couple quick comments. I like these for Stephen, and he's the guest of honor. And Stephen, hopefully you'll come back as not a guest of honor, just a regular best guest. Milagros writes, someone please explain, how do you turn or try to turn over a body with your fingertips? Have you ever heard of this in all your years of investigating crimes, Stephen?
It's funny. And I just a quick story. When I was engaged before I married my wife, we were living in Charlotte, and somebody murdered a guy in the apartment I just moved out of days previously. So when I ran over there after I heard the gunshots go off, when I ran into my old master bedroom that I had occupied just days prior and saw a dead guy, a guy with his head blown off, I pulled that guy off the bed and tried to do CPR to revive him. And his head was probably in worse shape than Paul's. And I was covered in blood from head to toe. So how you would go in there and try to flip over a body and only get blood on your fingertips or not have blood completely covering you is totally beyond me. Totally beyond me.
Final comment here, Corey Fulton. No one is mentioning that in the timeline, if Alec did not do it, someone else would also have to find weapons in the gun room and go back to kill them in the 5 minutes while he is still there. Stephen, once again, we mentioned this. There's been rumors swirling since the get-go about a cartel hit. You say there's no way. If it wasn't a cartel, you don't think it was anyone else either.
No. And if the cartel was involved, it would because Alex has been buying $50,000 a week worth of counterfeit opioids from the cartel, and he'd be dead already from a fentanyl overdose. So they wouldn't have to take out his wife and kid. He'd been gone.
I can't thank all of you enough. We got Amy Lawrence Lovely, Stephen Peterson, who I never called Patterson the whole night, so I'm proud of myself. Amy Zimmercheck and Loni Coonbs, some of the best guests of all of our best guests. A quick programming note, we will be live every night through the end of this trial, including deliberations, till we get a verdict. Hopefully we do get a verdict, but even if it's hung, we'll be here live until then. Fridays, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, we are live with Phil Waters, one of the most respected detectives in all of America, along with Scott Duffy, former FBI out of Delaware. And this Sunday night, this woman is coming out of retirement, my mother, and we are interviewing. This is a fascinating case. Google Ellen Greenberg. We could use Steve Peterson's help on this. She was stabbed 20 times. I believe it was back in 2011. She was engaged at the time. 10 of the stab wounds were to the back of her neck and back of her head, and 2 of them came, according to one medical examiner's report, after she died, and it was ruled a suicide. So we have her parents, Josh and Sandy Greenberg, coming on the show. It's going to be fascinating this Sunday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Until then, love you, America.